Well, hello. My name is Kate Bracken. I am with the Master Gardener Association in Goochland, Powhatan, and I am glad to be here and for the soil because without our healthy soil, we don't have life.
It is with great pleasure we welcome you to another episode of For the Soil, a Conversation. I'm your host, Jeff Ishii, and we've got a great guest coming back for part 2 of our conversation, and his name is Mike Parrish. He works in Cooperative Extension in the Commonwealth of Virginia, very active and a great resource when it comes to soil health in the Commonwealth of Virginia and the Mid-Atlantic region. We're going to get to part 2 of that conversation in just a moment, but I also wanted to remind you of some recent blog posts at forthesoil.org. That's the digit 4, thesoil.org, a featured resource, Desktop Farm Day, water quality and soil conservation, also beneficial soil fungi, and how to learn from your fellow soil health champions. All of those are recent posts on our blog. That's at forthesoil.org. Now let's get to today's conversation, part 2 with Mike Parrish. Welcome to part 2 of our conversation with Mike Parrish with Virginia Cooperative Extension based in Dinwiddie County, and my co-host, Dr. Eric Benfelt, Virginia Cooperative Extension Community Viability, and Mary Sketch Bryant with Virginia Soil Health Coalition. As I mentioned, this is part 2 of our conversation with Mike Parrish, and Dr. Benfelt had an interesting question about the comparison of soil health and also aquaculture. How are they related?
I had a question sort of picking up on this idea of the oyster seed bed, and living in the Shenandoah Valley, our landscape's a little bit different from Dinwiddie County, but you think about trying to eliminate erosion, and it's that's so important, protecting local waterways as well as the Chesapeake Bay and the southern rivers. If you could talk a little bit more about that, and your interest in oyster seed beds and how important that is to aquaculture and Virginia's economy.
Yeah, when I was filming the oyster seed production, I've also recorded, I'm getting ready to post oyster harvesting, but just talking with the watermen and the people at the Oyster Seed Holdings Company, how important that fresh water is and clean water is to their oyster farmers has, sparked a little interest in me trying to incorporate that in some other videos too, because since I've done some with cover crops, we think about keeping the James River and the Chesapeake Bay, where we have to think we're helping protect a couple of agriculture industries at the same time.
And Mike, also following up on the first part of the episode, you mentioned your cover crops video and how you want to redo it because you've learned a lot in that time. Would just be interested in some of that. I know there's so much new information coming out all the time, some of what you've been picking up over the last year.
Yeah, the first one I did, I basically just talked about, what covers do, but now I really want to dive into what each cover crop brings to the situation. Here in Dinwiddie, we've got, we've had titanium mining, so a lot of mine land reclamation was going on. So I've done a couple, test plots following, trying to help the landowner be able to reestablish that land back into ag production. And Virginia Tech's done a lot of work too with Dr. Daniels. And so, their information and what I'm seeing locally with covers, we were adding chicken litter. We were also working with, summer cover crops where we're putting pearl millet and Sudan grass. So a lot of people don't think about summer covers being a really good way to get you a bridge across to the next season and maybe improve that biomass. And one of the things that happened for me here was Ag Expo 2006. We were asked to host it. And so I took the steps of bringing in strip till tobacco as a topic to show to the expo crowd. And we also did some cover crops there, and we did forage crops. And it really was an impressive amount of people that called me back after the expo to ask, how has this worked? And the farmers that I had participate were very excited about showcasing what they were learning at the same time. And it had a pretty good inertia because my county went to 80% strip till tobacco right after the Ag Expo, display we had, or the showcase we did of strip till tobacco. And I was really proud of that because USDA got interested. We changed some policies, with strip till versus no till, and we had some cost share programs that had gotten started. And so it had some inertia from that good information that was taught on the ground during that Ag Expo meeting. And, that's always been a highlight for me to go to. And we did one of the first soil pits at my expo. Well, I can't say mine, but the one that was in Dinwiddie. But I had a large soil pit, and I went in and did some demonstrations with cover crops and no-till and conventional till planted corn. And then we cut a soil pit right through all three of those different, plantings. And it was really impressive. The farmers could really see, working with the soil scientists, how those cover crops really do penetrate very far through the soil and really help break up those hard pans, and, had so much biomass under there. And then it gave the soil scientists like Mark Ryder a chance to talk to the producers and say, this is what this crop can do for you. It can go down in the ground and pull nutrients back to the surface, reclaim something you thought you had lost as far as, an investment in the soil. And then just show the biomass. They were picking out the pieces, showing the earthworm holes, just really showing them how the health of that soil in a picture right there in a soil pit just spoke volumes. And that was where the people stayed. They got off the tour buses, every time right at that soil pit and wanted to learn what was going on. And so those pits really do help a lot to kind of show below ground what we always can't see. We see the green plants up top, but just to see how healthy that root system is and how it's thriving and how it's growing really can make an impact, to the producers and to the novices that don't realize what goes on in agriculture.
You're listening to For the Soil, a conversation. And we're talking today with Mike Parrish with Virginia Cooperative Extension. He is housed in Dinwiddie County, Virginia, just south of Richmond, southwest of Petersburg. And Mike, I'm glad you brought up the topic of cover crops. I want to pick your brain a little bit. Saw an interesting conversation on a gardening Facebook page just a few weeks ago, and there was a debate going on about cover crops and green manure. Some people say, oh, it's the same thing. Some people, oh, no, it's different. It's different. In your opinion, and gardeners would use the term green manure and farmers traditionally would use cover crop. Is it the same thing?
Yes, it is. I mean, that biomass going back on the ground acts just like I did it in my video to try to give students a comparison. When we recycle manure from our livestock, it's basically plant material, and then we're putting it out on the soil. Well, it's gone through a little bit of digestion and it's a little freer nutrients. But, we're doing the same thing, with the cover crops. The cover crops are taking in the nutrients, and they're retaining them in that plant material and that biomass in the roots, and just holding it in place until it can start to break down and be able to be released again to the next crop that's kind of scavenging and looking for food.
And Mike, with the cover crops, if you could speak about sort of the seasonality, their winter cover crops, some summer cover crops, and then you also have annual grasses or maybe annual legumes. And what should somebody know, particularly if we're getting closer to spring or even into summer?
Yeah. So if you were trying to think about putting covers up now, that you would go a lot with your annual covers, which would be, we've got different things like millets and sorghum Sudan grass and things like that are heavy biomass and good scavengers that you can plant during the summer. Some people use buckwheat. Some of the beekeepers plant patches, and they don't really realize, I've talked to several of them, that they're planting buckwheat during the summer months, and it's really improving their soils, and then they can come back in the next year and probably plant a vegetable garden. And got one that's on his third year of buckwheat, and he's going to go to planting his vegetable garden. But those are kind of your summer ones. And then we go into our fall planted that are our cool season covers. That's when you're planting your small grains. And then, those were, your wheat and your rye. And then you can also plant your brassicas then and a few legumes in the fall, like your vetches and your clover. The only thing is you got to understand the growth pattern of them and their temperatures that they tolerate and when they go dormant or slow down. So, if you really want to get a cover crop established in the fall, you've got to start planting early. You can't wait till October, November. You need to start, in September, so they get a good foothold, they get a good root system started, so they can tolerate the winter and be ready to rock and roll in the spring, and build up a lot of biomass in those warmer temperatures as they start coming on in the springtime.
And Mike, you brought up working with homeowners on cover crops as well, kind of that smaller scale. Is it a similar approach, or how do you work with them differently?
It's similar, just on a smaller scale. They may not have but a 30 by 30 garden patch, but I've told them, I said, you've only got a finite amount of soil here, unless you're going to purchase it and bring new soil and new topsoil, and you want to take care of what you have and improve it. And so, if they could plant a cover in the winter, I've been out to gardens where they just left all the residue from the garden and it's melted away, and they've got little gullies that start and wash. And so I've told them to retain, it helps retain the soil, but it can build it back up for you yourself. And it actually looks better. When you're looking at a dead patch in your yard, if you have a nice lush, cover out there, it looks bright and green, and you've got something that's a little more visually attractive for your property. And that's the same way for the farmers. A lot of landowners are very excited about cover crops because, they may be used to looking at corn stubble all winter long, or soybean stubble, and it's, it looks a lot better to have a nice lush, small grain out there growing, and it does help property value to a degree. It at least aesthetically looks a lot better, and they don't realize how much it's actually improving their own soil.
Mike, are tillage radishes considered a cover crop?
Yeah.
And could you explain for the listeners who they're not familiar with that term, what is a tillage radish, and is it a cover crop?
It's a cover crop. Tillage radish is the daikon radish. It's also edible. We do have people that will go out when people plant them and actually borrow a few from people's, cover crop fields. But yes, we interseed that. It works really well as a mixture to put a cereal grain with the cover crop radish. The radishes, some call them tillage because they will push down through the soil and help break up some hard pans. And, it creates some tunnels for the next year's crop. It aerates the soil. There's others that do just as well that have smaller roots that help aerate the soil and kind of break it up. But the tillage radish has been kind of advertised that that's a tillage, crop. And so it buries down, and then we always add a small grain to it. I really like a combination of, a legume, a radish or a mustard with a small grain, because, as the vetch starts to grow, or if we do English pea or a winter pea, that's another good legume for planting in the fall as a cover. You get your nitrogen from those, you get biomass from them, but then you need a crop to be a scaffold crop. So we like the small grains for the winter pea to grow up on and kind of hold it up so it doesn't smother everything underneath it quite as much. And then the vetch actually grow up a little more and get some more biomass instead of kind of smothering itself over, and you get just a lot more growth from it. And so adding those three together tends to work really well. And in places we've seen with the brassicas, it is gives some suppression of nematodes. Some species out west, they use them a lot, so they don't have to fumigate. They'll use some brassicas as a rotation and help break up, some of the pressure of nematodes in the soil.
And Mike, you had mentioned about working with some local beekeepers, and one of the principles being energizing with diversity. If you could speak a little bit about the importance of diversity, whether it's for bees, the diversity of crops, and also habitat for wildlife or birds.
Yeah, I get a lot of calls on wildlife plots. I've got several people that plant, vegetation, for wildlife plots for either hunting or just photography or just to see, nature closer to their homes. But, I've also got them in contact with people that have bees. So if you can incorporate something like buckwheat and have something that's flowering during the summer on a heavy basis, it really does, give those beekeepers a chance to move their hives around and bring in a different type of flavor, to their honey. If we got a lot of clovers, that's what everyone always thinks about, good clover honey, but there's some good, tulip poplar honey and locust honey. And so if they can get the bees out early to the forage in the woods, and then you've got these other crops coming, can really be a benefit to some of the local beekeepers too. And it helps form a relationship with the farmers in some cases where, you see that, beekeepers are worried about farmers, applying chemicals. And then you have farmers that have, fields that they don't know where the bees are. So this way it kind of joins up some communication where they are talking and they both understand both sides, of what they're trying to accomplish. And I think there's some education value there for that too.
Mike, I know you create a lot of educational resources. What are some of your recent favorite resources that you'd like to share?
I mean, as far as the videos, I've got a lot of them already filmed. Just the time is sitting down and actually doing the editing and still do, my regular job. And I'm sure Jeff can understand that it takes a while to put it together to tell the story. And if I forget a piece, I've got to go back. And then when you're working in agriculture, you only have a small period of time to capture that element of what that story is. If you miss out on it, you got to go and wait till the next season again and come through. And I want it to be authentic from Virginia and from Virginia farmers instead of trying to borrow film or things from others and tell a good story. But I want the youth to be, pulled in and learn more about what farmers do and how important it is. And, our farmers are a class act, and I want to showcase that.
We're talking today with Mike Parrish with Virginia Cooperative Extension, housed in Dinwiddie County, Virginia. And Mike, one final question, just a couple of minutes remaining, but who inspired you to do what you do? You've been doing this for 30 years now, but somebody lit a fire underneath Mike Parrish. Was it in college? Was it, somebody in the family? Can you tell that story?
It's a combination. When I was a kid, we had 2 or 3 extension agents that came through. Meade Harrison was one that worked in tobacco. There was Dick White was an extension agent back then. And it just saw how the community revolved around the extension agent and really thought a lot of the information that was coming. I never thought I'd become an extension agent, but I'm a talker. So I guess I've got one point that I need to be an extension agent. But I looked up to him, and my grandfather said that's the kind of job you ought to get, because he thought farming was so hard. He thought maybe extension would be a good change for me. But I had gone down the route in production and was coming back to the farm. And then when he passed, I kind of moved on to extension in southern states for a little while. But I guess my big inspiration was, seeing how those extension agents could really impact a farm. And then my mentor with extension, Jimmy Maitland, was a big influence on, how I run my programs, how I have a relationship with the farmers. And he was great to me when he started. When he retired, but in the background, he was giving me, some advice and kind of point me in the right direction. And I've got a great resource all over the state. I mean, we got so many good extension agents, that are friends of mine, and we talk often, and we try to all emulate programs when we can and share. So it's a good resource. And then just the land grant institutions are great. I've got good friends in NC State, a couple at Penn State that I've become friends with over the years. And it's nice to get that regional information back and forth and information sharing. And I mean, even going to programs down at Mount Olive. So I'm showing the diversity of resources that have really influenced me to see how that our ag community is really influential to all that participate.
And speaking of resources, my final question, you mentioned in part 1 of our conversation, which our listeners can go back to and listen to that one. In part 1, you mentioned a desktop computer resource. Please forgive me. I didn't recall the name of that. What was that?
I created a Google site called Desktop Farm Day, and I have some videos on there that explain, different cropping systems, and they're short and they're just try to, give an overview. I even made a couple, I think, that are on there. What does an extension agent do? Because people really don't understand, our jobs. We're so diverse across the state, and then each county has, their own, set of farmers and cropping systems. Like Dinwiddie is very diverse with large scale, row crop production, because I've got cotton, peanuts, tobacco, corn and soybeans and wheat. And I also have a lot of forages here too.
I just Googled it, and it's Desktop Farm Day. There it is. A great resource. Thank you for being our guest today, Mike Parrish with Virginia Cooperative Extension in Dinwiddie County. And Eric and Mary, will catch you guys in the next one.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Mike.
Thank you,
y'all.
Mike,
Enjoyed it.
Jeff, Eric.
For the Soil, a Conversation is made possible with funding support from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and the Agua Fund. Other partners include the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service, Virginia Cooperative Extension, Virginia State University, Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, and partners of the Virginia Soil Health Coalition. Views expressed on this podcast are those of each individual guest. To download a copy of this or any other episode, visit the website forthesoil.org. If you have a specific question about soil health, just call your local extension office, your local USDA service center, or a soil and water conservation district office. Music used during today's program was provided courtesy of the Flip Charts, all rights reserved. For the Soil, a Conversation is produced by On the Farm Radio in collaboration with Virginia Tech. I'm your host, Jeff Ishii.